Imagine picking the lock to your ruthless mafia husband's desk, only to find a trophy box filled with photos of his mistresses. Alicia thought she was looking for financial records to build her divorce case, but instead, she uncovered years of carefully documented betrayals. 6 months pregnant and staring at her own humiliation, she didn't break down. She decided to utterly destroy him in court. Picture the scene as midnight settles over the estate. Alicia stands in the quiet hallway, the bedroom door cracked just enough to let a sliver of golden light escape. Her hands cradle her pregnant belly, shaking with pure joy. She arrived early to deliver a beautiful surprise, his favorite vintage and a fresh ultrasound in her bag. But then, time completely freezes. An unfamiliar giggle bleeds through the heavy wood, tangling with the low voice of her husband. You and I have watched this exact tragedy unfold before. She pushes the door open, and in one brutal heartbeat, her fairy tale burns to the ground. The candlelight exposes a betrayal so profound it destroys her. We eventually learn a harsh truth. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones holding the matches. The sheer audacity suffocates the midnight air. A stranger is draped across the most feared mafia boss in Milan, wearing a sickening smirk. Then Riccardo looks up and locks eyes with his wife. The irony is deafening. He has the words family above all etched into his neck, a mark that now mocks Alessia to her soul. Most people would collapse right there, screaming in agony. But Alessia goes entirely numb. She stares down this terrifying king of the criminal underworld, a man whose violent hands have crushed empires. Gripping her stomach, she swallows the agonizing reality. No tears fall, no rage explodes. She simply turns her back and walks away. True strength is not always loud. Often, the most powerful reaction to a deep betrayal is absolute, freezing silence. Let us pull focus back to the suffocating tension of that hallway. Every click of her heels against the marble floor strikes like a judge dropping a gavel. With each step, she leaves her naive self behind in the shadows, back in that ruined bedroom. The untouchable syndicate boss is losing his grip. He curses loudly, frantically untangling himself from the silk sheets, shouting her name in raw panic. But she never glances back. She stares down 23 steps of cold stone. She used to count those stairs on nights she felt like a cherished queen. Tonight, that staircase is her escape route. The beautiful illusion is dead. Letting go of a toxic dream is agonizing, but walking away from a lie is always the first step toward finding your true worth. Those grand stairs are her only lifeline. Riccardo's booming voice tears through the quiet mansion, demanding her to wait. The heavy thud of his footsteps means he is closing the distance fast. Picture this ruthless boss who makes enforcers tremble, frantically buttoning his shirt as he chases his pregnant wife. She keeps moving, eyes locked on the front doors. Her keys rest exactly where she left them, when she still believed his promises. Then, his rough hand clamps down on her wrist. Look closely at this moment. She stops, not because his strength forces her. She stops only because she, as if nobody, can truly control you without your consent. Reclaiming your personal power begins the exact moment you refuse to be a victim of another person's chaos. Time stretches thin as she turns to face him in the dim foyer. Riccardo towers above her, a massive force of nature now completely unraveling. His jaw is locked, and those famously dead eyes are wide with desperate terror. He begs for a chance to explain, grasping at pathetic excuses. Alessia merely lowers her gaze to his hand on her wrist. She studies his knuckle tattoos, the ink she used to kiss in the dark. It all feels disgustingly cheap now. Without raising her voice, she states there is nothing else left to say. Her tone is empty, echoing like a ghost. In that freezing silence, the underworld king realizes his empire is turning to ash. Words lose all their meaning when actions prove them false. We must remember that a shattered trust is never repaired by empty apologies. Stick with me here, because this is where the dynamic flips. Feel the heavy silence in that foyer. She strips away his authority with a quiet truth. She saw everything. He scrambles, claiming the stranger meant absolutely nothing. Alessia cuts through his panic, asking if that changes the reality of his choice. With agonizing urge, she peels his fingers off her wrist. He braces for a screaming match, but she whispers for him to stay back. Desperate, he growls that she is his wife. She replies that he just proved how worthless that title truly is. When he begs, reminding her of the baby, she simply says, "Watch me." The heavy door clicks shut. Sometimes, the absolute most profound boundary you can ever set is simply walking away without giving someone the satisfaction of your anger. Milan is stained by centuries of brutal betrayals, yet tonight feels uniquely tragic. Alessia walks with grim purpose toward the car he bought for their anniversary. The bitter irony is heavy. Sliding into the leather seat, she realizes her hands are completely steady. That sweet girl who parked this car 90 minutes ago, clutching an ultrasound photo, died in that hallway. The woman gripping the steering wheel now is reborn from the ashes of a shattered heart. Here is a vital truth we all need to remember in life. When your entire world suddenly collapses, you do not have to fall down with it. She presses the gas pedal hard, melting into the blur of glowing neon lights and ancient cobblestones, leaving the suffocating lies of her mafia marriage far behind in the shadows. She arrives at a discreet hotel in the city center where wealth buys absolute silence. At the front counter, she makes her first strike. She leaves the feared mafia surname behind, checking in under her maiden name. In one breath, she sheds her label as the property of a crime family. Alone in the suite, she stands by the massive windows, cradling her stomach. It is a baby girl. That was the precious secret she wanted to share hours ago. Pressing her face against the glass, a heavy wave of grief crashes over her. Yet, feeling pain does not equal defeat. Grieving the loss of a beautiful lie is a difficult but completely necessary step toward building an honest future, and she refuses to let the sorrow drown her. Instead of letting sorrow consume her, Alessia weaponizes her pain. She examines her trauma like a detective scanning a crime scene. 3 years of a hollow marriage, 2 agonizing years praying for a child. She gave everything, only to find him tangled with a stranger. The darkest realization twists the knife. That woman looked entirely too comfortable. There was no shock when the bedroom door opened. This was his established lifestyle. He played her for a fool, hiding his nature behind her devotion. It teaches us a brutal lesson. We often project our own good heart onto toxic people, completely ignoring the glaring red flags waving right in front of us. Suddenly, her phone buzzes relentlessly on the nightstand. The untouchable mafia boss is completely unraveling. Ricardo's name flashes on the phone, glowing like a severe hazard warning. She watches the messages pile up into frantic demands. Finally, she presses the power button, plunging the suite into pure silence. The fallout can wait. You and I have probably both made this mistake, ignoring our gut instincts to protect a fragile illusion. She lies awake, analyzing the last 3 years. Those late nights at syndicate meetings were all convenient lies. The warning signs were everywhere. She used to blame the stress of the underworld for his cruelty, convinced his twisted affection was love. Lying in the dark, she understands a painful reality. The absolute hardest step of healing is finally forgiving yourself for choosing to believe someone else's beautiful lie. Excusing his cruelty as passion was a desperate lie to protect her heart. Suddenly, a sharp kick against her ribs brings her back to reality. Alacia presses a hand to her stomach, and fresh tears fall. She is not crying over a cheating mobster. Her heart is shattering for the little girl growing inside her. This innocent child will be born into the ashes of a ruined family, fathered by a ghost. In the dark room, she whispers a tearful apology to her baby. Yet, as she cries, a fierce resolve takes root in her chest. An unbreakable vow is forged right there in the shadows. We shape the next generation by the personal standards we refuse to lower. She will absolutely never allow her daughter to believe that enduring deep betrayal is simply the required cost of finding love. As a child, Alacia watched her mother play the tragic role of the silent, suffering wife. She witnessed the slow fade of a woman who accepted disrespect to keep the peace. She swore to break that generational curse. Whatever violent syndicate war Ricardo plans to wage to drag her back, she is fully prepared. Fast forward to daybreak. The Milan's sky hangs heavy with bruised clouds. Alacia locks eyes with her reflection in the mirror. Outwardly, she looks identical to the girl who captivated the boss 3 years ago. But the soul behind her eyes has fundamentally shifted. The fragile girl who believed her love could fix a monster is gone. It is a harsh but necessary realization. You can never save a toxic person by simply loving them harder, but you can always save yourself by choosing to walk away. Let us unpack this together, shall we? Watch the exact moment the warmth in Alessia's eyes crystallizes into cold steel. Ricardo used to obsess over her gentleness, treating her as his pristine sanctuary from the blood-stained reality of the underworld. But that softness is gone. She learned that being sweet only paints a target on your back. Sitting in the quiet, she forces down breakfast just to nourish her unborn daughter before turning on her phone. 47 missed calls, 32 texts. She deletes his gaslighting messages instantly, but presses play on the voicemails. The untouchable crime boss is weeping, begging for her attention. It is a striking display of karmic justice. The lesson is timeless. Those who carelessly destroy your peace will panic the second you take back your power. Picture this scene in the dark. A terrifying crime boss is leaving messages like a broken teenager. In the first recording, his voice actively shakes as he swears he can explain the betrayal. By the second, he tries to force the mask of authority back on. He claims his armed enforcers are only searching for her to protect their baby, weaponizing guilt. But the third voicemail strips the kingpin completely bare. He admits he is sitting on the floor of her empty closet, breathing in the fading trace of her perfume, crying that he will spend his life fixing what he shattered. The lesson here echoes through every empty room. You rarely understand the weight of what you possess until your own hands crush it. All the dirty money in the world cannot buy back a single ounce of broken trust. Alacia listens to the agonizing sound of his tears, yet her eyes remain perfectly dry. She absorbs the recordings exactly twice, hits delete, and dials a ruthless divorce lawyer. The attorney sits across his heavy oak desk, barely blinking when she drops the dangerous name of Riccardo Moretti. He simply nods, addressing her as Mrs. Moretti. But Alacia stops him cold. Her voice is steady as she tells him it is Miss Bellini from now on. In that single breath, she is shedding the suffocating weight of his criminal legacy right there in the room. The lesson here is simple but deeply vital. Never let a broken relationship dictate who you are. Reclaiming your own identity is the very first step in taking back your life from the people who tried to bury your spirit. The attorney leans forward, warning her about the violent storm ahead. Divorcing a syndicate leader means navigating a deadly minefield of hidden assets and loyal soldiers. But Alessia refuses to break eye contact. She explains she spent the night studying their prenuptial agreement, hunting for a weakness. She found the fatal flaw, a strict infidelity clause that hands her every single card. The lawyer is left speechless. She does not want his tainted mansions or his blood money. Her only mission is securing full custody of her unborn child. Stick with me, because the lesson here is crucial. Emotional armor is a great defense, but quiet preparation is your sharpest weapon. When someone hands you a tragedy, you study the fine print and use their own rules to walk away victorious. Here is where the power dynamic shifts. Alessia recites paragraph 47 from memory. It is the exact legal clause stripping custody from a cheating partner. She rests a protective hand over her stomach, making a silent vow. Her daughter will never grow up in a toxic environment where betrayal is swept under an expensive rug. She refuses to let her child normalize a revolving door of mistresses. The lawyer asks if she is prepared to declare open war on the underworld, warning her of the looming danger. She does not even blink. She is ready. The life lesson here rings profoundly true. You must never settle for a partner who treats basic loyalty like a temporary suggestion. You alone set the standard for what your family deserves, and you defend that boundary at all costs. With absolute calm, Alessia tells her lawyer that reconciliation is dead. Paperwork is finalized, and their quiet war begins. For 3 days, she vanishes into a nondescript hotel room, leaving Ricardo in the dark. Blinded by panic, his toxic need for control flares up. He ruthlessly freezes every joint bank account they share, believing he can force her submission by starving her out financially. But the mafia boss forgot one crucial detail. He forgot the quiet inheritance from her grandfather. Money she never touched once during their entire marriage. She remains completely untouchable. The takeaway here is something we should all remember. Always keep a piece of your independence carefully guarded. Having your own financial freedom is the strongest armor you can wear against anyone trying to cage you. By the 4th day, his panic sours into desperate rage. Ricardo unleashes elite attorneys to crush the divorce proceedings. Their opening move is a profound insult. They claim his betrayal with Valentina was a momentary lapse in judgment, supposedly triggered by marital stress. Sitting in her hotel room, Alessia actually laughs out loud. What stress could he possibly mean? The terrible burden of a devoted wife and a peaceful home. She knows the cold truth. Valentina was a permanent fixture in his shadow, not some fleeting mistake. It is maddening how quickly the guilty paint themselves as victims. The lesson to carry with you is vital. People who betray you will always draft a script where they are the martyr. Never let anyone gaslight you into carrying the weight of their own sins. When her lawyer asks how long the affair has been burning, Alessia just smiles. It is a sharp, dangerous expression, proving the mafia boss isn't the only one who understands strategy. Exactly 1 week after her world shattered, she marches right back up to the iron doors of the Moretti estate. But she is not there to offer forgiveness. She arrives at high noon, flanked by 2 towering private security guards and her legal counsel. Ricardo is waiting in the grand foyer. He is dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, but his dark eyes are hollow and desperate. The lesson in this moment is legendary. When you finally have to face the demon that broke your heart, You look it dead in the eye, but you never go alone. Guard your personal boundaries with everything you have and relentlessly protect your peace. The tension inside that grand foyer is heavy enough to crush bone. Ricardo stands under the chandelier, the ink of his syndicate tattoos crawling up his neck. Those letters proudly spell out family above all. The hypocrisy is so thick it feels like breathing poison. He whispers her name, and the king of the underworld suddenly sounds like a frightened child. Alessia does not flinch. She delivers her terms with absolute ice, stating she is only there to retrieve personal documents and will be gone in 2 hours. She shuts down his desperate attempt to explain himself. The lesson here cuts deep into human nature. Words are cheap, and hypocrisy is always exposed by action. A person can carve their supposed morals right into their skin, but real loyalty is only measured by what they do when nobody is watching. You and I have probably both felt this kind of bitter, cold clarity. She looks him dead in the eye, warning him that any interference will be heavily documented for the judge. The muscles in Ricardo's jaw jump wildly. You can see the controlling nature of the mob boss fighting to break out. Yet, for the first time, Alessia feels absolutely no desire to soothe his rising anger. He admits he sent the mansion staff away so they could talk, shamelessly using their unborn baby as a weapon of guilt. Without missing a beat, she reminds him that her pregnancy did not stop him from dragging another woman into his bed. The vital life lesson here is one of profound liberation. Stop shielding the fragile feelings of someone who recklessly destroyed yours. Dropping the urge to heal a toxic partner is where true power begins. After tearing apart his hypocritical routine, she turns her back and climbs the marble staircase. Panic finally shatters Ricardo's composure, and he shouts up to her that he loves her. Alessia freezes. She does not turn around. She simply tells the empty air that she does not believe him, and that their definitions of love are completely incompatible. She continues her climb, moving quietly through the dark, echoing halls of the estate. She feels like a ghost haunting her own ruined past. She takes only her grandmother's humble jewelry, leaving his blood-soaked diamonds sitting in the dust. The profound life lesson here is undeniable. Love without fundamental respect is just manipulation dressed up. If someone's idea of loving you includes dragging your dignity through the mud, it is time to pack your bags and walk out. She walks past their leather-bound wedding album, viewing it as a glossy artifact of a beautiful lie. With her documents secured, she steps into the shadows of his private study, slipping the desk lock with a quiet click, a dark skill learned from years beside a mobster. She hunts for financial records to cement her case. What she pulls from the bottom drawer stops her dead. It isn't just offshore bank statements. It is a hidden steel lockbox overflowing with printed photographs. Pictures of Valentina, yes, but also a dozen other women. It is a staggering visual timeline of betrayal stretching back through their entire marriage. The lesson to take away is terrifying but necessary. Buried secrets always claw their way to the surface. If you ignore the quiet warnings, life will eventually force your eyes open. Picture this scene: a woman, 6 months pregnant, grounded on the freezing hardwood of a monster's private office. Glossy photographs fan out around her, like tarot cards predicting a doomed future, proving his betrayal began long before she ever wore white. In this suffocating silence, something fundamental inside Alessia simply snaps. The mercy she once kept for Riccardo Moretti vanishes like breath on a winter window. She descends the grand staircase, finding him pacing below like the crumbling ruins of a mafia king. Pausing on the final step, her voice is completely dead as she asks if he remembers the twisted trophies locked in his desk. We must understand this brutal truth. Betrayal burns the bridge of empathy to ash. Never expect grace from the spirit you chose to slaughter in the dark. Let us examine the anatomy of a broken vow. Alessia does not simply confront her husband, she clinically dismantles him. With a tone as hollow as a winter wind, she thanks Ricardo for dating his illicit photographs. The blood drains completely from his face. She stares right through him, asking if she was ever anything more than a beautiful ornament bought to soften his violent public image. When the underworld king falls to his knees to beg that she raises a single hand, she tells him to keep his empty apologies, promising to burn his syndicate to ash using his own arrogant souvenirs as the matches. The truth is your absolute strongest weapon. When someone hands you the evidence of their own destruction, you use it to finally carve out your new life. Alessia knows exactly where to find the artery. She promises to weaponize his own prenuptial agreement against him, turning his legal shield into a blade. She will take full custody, severing him from the only pure thing this terrifying mafia prince has ever loved. She steps deep into his shadow, close enough to witness the violent pulse in his neck. Leaning closer, she whispers that he should have honored his sacred vows. As she turns away, his hand shoots out, grasping at empty air. The ruthless architect of the underworld is reduced to a weeping boy, begging for his little girl in the cold hallway. Arrogance is a quiet poison. When you walk through the world believing you are entirely untouchable, you will eventually lose the one thing you cannot live without. Ricardo has always lived believing he pulled the strings of the universe, yet here he stands, a ruined monarch, pleading at the border of his own destruction. For one agonizing second, Alessia searches his face and sees the ghost of the magnetic man who swept her away. She sees the echo of the lover who whispered sweet promises into the dark. But a ghost is all he is. Staring into his hollow, desperate eyes, she delivers the final strike. She calmly tells him he should have thought of his family before making a secret romance his true religion. The heavy oak door slams shut between them. You simply cannot construct a lasting fortress on the crumbling foundation of a lie. The peace is officially broken, and she firmly refuses to be a casualty in his impending war. You and I know how these power struggles usually go. The legal battlefield becomes a theater of dirty tactics. Ricardo commands his expensive attorneys to suffocate her with paperwork, aggressively moving to bury the photographs and minimize his betrayal. It is pure psychological warfare. But Alessia plants her feet like an ancient fortress. She creates a quiet sanctuary across the city, far from the toxic gravity of his estate. Channeling her remaining strength into her unborn child, she faces every medical appointment like a warrior. Eventually, she even steps into a therapist's office. For a proud woman, this feels like an admission of defeat, yet the exact opposite is true. Seeking a guiding hand in your darkest hour is actually the ultimate demonstration of true human resilience. Alessia believes sitting on a therapy couch is a monument to her brokenness, but this quiet room offers a profound refuge. There are no pitying stares, only a grounded presence as she unpacks 3 years of mafia marriage illusions and the cold isolation of solo motherhood. Soon, the therapist hands her a mirror of reality. Alessia is drowning in tears, berating her own foolishness for not seeing the monster behind the man. The therapist gently halts the spiral, explaining that offering your trust to a partner is not a tragic character flaw. It is the purest definition of being human. The real triumph was walking away the moment his mask slipped. You are never foolish for having an open heart. You claim your absolute power when you firmly revoke that trust from those who only play games. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? This is where the emotional architecture finally shifts. Alessia admits how Ricardo manipulated her into feeling like a rare gem, painting her as the single ray of light in his brutal world. She craved the illusion that their romance was insulated from his bloodshed. The therapist meets her gaze, assuring her that hungering for pure love is never a weakness. The guilt rests entirely on the predator who weaponized her empathy. That profound validation breaks the dam, and years of tension flow out in heavy tears. Months later, heavily pregnant, she steps back into the light. She attends an elite gallery opening, boldly returning to the exact same room where she first met the devil himself. True healing means standing at the scene of the crash and realizing you survived. Crossing the threshold of that elegant gallery is a calculated act of war. She is silently broadcasting to the city elite that she refuses to be quietly erased or reduced to a tragic whisper. She glides through the space wrapped in an emerald gown that honors the heavy curve of her pregnancy. Adorned in antique pearls, she radiates an untouchable calm, knowing perfectly well that the wolf is waiting. Across the room, Ricardo holds court among his dangerous associates. His immaculate suit frames the dark, violent ink climbing his neck. Those same tattoos once sent an intoxicating thrill through her veins. Now they are glaring neon warning signs. Remember this crucial lesson. Red flags are harsh warnings meant to protect your spirit, not pretty decorations to romanticize a broken heart. Their eyes lock across the crowded floor, and the atmosphere instantly turns to Lady Alessia refuses to blink. Ricardo stands frozen like a statue of dread. For a few agonizing heartbeats, the expensive artwork and the murmuring aristocrats completely melt away. The universe shrinks to a suffocating standoff. Then, Alessia drops the hammer without lifting a finger. She simply smiles. It is not an invitation. It is the chilling smile of a woman who has already won the war. She turns her attention to Marco, a powerful older gentleman from her grandfather's era, laughing warmly at his stories. She feels Ricardo's furious gaze scorching her spine. Let him burn, she decides. She spends the rest of the night floating freely, a queen firmly reclaiming her own peaceful throne. Naturally, the wealthy elite are feasting on the tension. Whispers hum through the gallery like an agitated hive as people trade dark rumors about Ricardo, quietly applauding Alessia for her courtroom victories. She allows the gossip to wash over her with impenetrable grace. Then, Marco gently places a weathered hand on the small of her back to guide her toward the champagne. It is a deeply innocent gesture, but to a possessive mafia prince lurking in the shadows, it is an unforgivable declaration of war. The room's temperature plummets. Alessia feels the cold prickle of danger crawl up her spine seconds before she turns her head. Ricardo is advancing. Always trust that sudden drop in your stomach. Your intuition recognizes a predator long before your eyes do. You and I know that shift in the air before a storm breaks. Alessia has 30 seconds before her toxic former husband shatters his public mask. She smoothly excuses herself from Marco, slipping away before Ricardo closes the gap. She weaves into a tight circle of wealthy socialites near the exit. Finding safety in numbers is a brilliant survival tactic when managing a monster. Ricardo freezes dead in his tracks. Even from 20 feet away, his raw fury is suffocating. His jaw locks, tattooed hands curling into tightly clenched fists as he wrestles with the urge to drag her out into the night. Alessia simply casts one casual glance over her shoulder, meeting his manic stare. The unsaid words hang heavy in the silence. I do not belong to you anymore. Let us look closely at the weight of a single, dismissing glance. For a man used to absolute control, her indifference struck like a physical blow. His dark eyes swept the room, brewing a terrifying storm of fury, heartbreak, and a deeply toxic obsession. It was a stare that would freeze an ordinary person. Yet Alessia simply turned her back, exiting the gathering early under the polite guise of pregnancy. She felt her spirit soar. She had stared into the hungry jaws of the wolf and refused to blink, proving to him and every watching elite that she remained completely unbroken. Slipping into her car, she closed her eyes and breathed out a sigh of hard-earned victory. The lesson here is simple but profound. The purest revenge is proving that a toxic person has absolutely no power over your internal peace. The quiet comfort of the car shattered when a voice cut through the dark, praising her performance. Alessia gasped, heart slamming against her ribs. Ricardo sat swallowed by the shadows of her own backseat. How does a ruthless boss bypass high-end security? Leaning forward, he revealed her driver now belonged to him. He bragged that every guard in the city was either taking his money or paralyzed by his reputation. He wanted to wrap his cold fingers around her reality, proving she could never outrun him. But Alessia forced her breathing to steady and ordered him out. He snarled that his dirty empire funded her polished life. It reminds us of a simple truth. Wealth can never buy true freedom, and your safety only exists in the boundaries you absolutely refuse to compromise. She coldly reminded him that her family trust was managed by the same firm his crime syndicate depended on. They were untouchable. As that reality sank in, the terrifying mafia boss mask shattered. Agonizing desperation bled out of him. He was begging, offering anything just to wake up near his little girl. The thought of losing his daughter broke him down, but Alessia remained a stone wall. She stated he sacrificed his family the night he chose betrayal. He pleaded it was a single mistake. She snapped back that his hidden photos proved a deliberate pattern of lies. He watered a seed of vengeance with his own hands. The harsh truth is unavoidable. Your darkest secrets will always leave a paper trail, and eventually, the people you hurt will read every single page. Picture the heavy air of midnight, rain bleeding down the glass. Alessia lets it all out, her voice trembling but sharper than broken glass. She throws the damning photographs between them. They are paper ghosts, proving the monster he truly is. When Ricardo desperately plays the biology card, claiming a right to their unborn child, she cuts him down. Blood does not forge a father. Showing up, standing firm, and honoring your promises, that is what makes a real father. He had burned every bridge. Then the tension snaps. With a predatory blur, he closes the distance between them, a shadow lunging into the desperate light. The lesson here is quiet but incredibly heavy. Genetics might plant the seed of a family, but only unwavering loyalty can actually keep it alive. Let us step into this frozen moment together. Alessia stands her ground, staring into the hollow eyes of Ricardo, the reigning phantom of the city. She asks if he truly wants to add a salt to his ledger of sins. For a breathless second, the ruthless boss awakens, a dark storm funneling toward her. But then his armor shatters. His hands fall away. For the first time, the untouchable Don looks paralyzed by the terror of losing his bloodline. His voice fractures, confessing he has no idea how to repair this ruin. Alessia remains resolute, reminding him that the bill always comes due. Defeated, he commands her out of the car. We are left with one of life's hardest truths. Even the most powerful people must eventually pay the ultimate price for the darkness they sow. Imagine the bitter chill of the streetlights hitting the wet pavement. Alessia yanks her wrist free from the dawn. She looks this underworld king dead in the eye and builds an iron wall right on the sidewalk. No messages, no midnight calls, only the cold language of attorneys. She tells him to stop haunting her life from behind the tinted glass of his luxury cars. Ricardo, the most lethal man in the city, just swallows it. He steps backward into the biting wind, completely hollowed out. As his car disappears into the night, the silence left behind is deafening. Nobody is finding peace tonight. It reminds us of a bitter but necessary reality. Drawing a firm boundary is deeply agonizing, but protecting your own peace of mind requires you to stand tall and never hold back. You and I must look closely at what truly broke her in that moment. It was not his rage, but his agonizing desperation. Ricardo was a titan who solved problems with brutal force and wealth. Yet here, his voice broke. She once believed he was a god in his grim universe, capable of bending reality. Now, he stands utterly helpless. The tragic part? A quiet corner of her soul wanted to hold this ticking time bomb and soothe his panic. But she grounds herself. A gentle kick against her hand reminds her of the fragile life growing inside her. We are forced to confront a painful truth about human nature. You simply cannot heal a deeply broken soul, no matter the depth of your love. You must secure your own survival before you get dragged into the dark. This is the exact beat where Alessia reclaims her power. She is not walking away out of spite or a hollow need for revenge. She fought the unborn daughter resting near her heart, ensuring the child never learns to trade dignity for a toxic shadow. She refuses to be sacrificed on the altar of a broken romance, pushing through a brutal divorce that feels like an active battlefield. Legal strikes fly like artillery in the dark. She hides in a fortress, guarded by men untouched by her husband's poison. The lesson here resonates deeply in the quiet of the night. True power is never found in throwing a punch or matching cruelty with cruelty. Real strength is severing a dark generational curse, ensuring the people you love can finally breathe without ever tasting fear. The security team protecting her is bleeding her inheritance dry, but breathing clean air is worth every coin. Through the grinding gears of legal discovery, her attorneys finally unearth the rotting roots of Ricardo's empire. These were the whispers she had chosen to ignore for years. Smuggling, extortion, the chilling disappearance of a rival boss right before her wedding. Her lawyer meets her gaze, delivering a crushing blow. The man she loved was a living nightmare, and in the bruised corners of her heart, she already knew. This forces a heavy realization about self-deception. Closing your eyes to a warning sign never erases it. It merely ensures you will stumble blindly in the dark when the terrible truth finally comes crashing through your fragile illusion. You and I have both looked the other way when reality was too sharp to swallow. Alessia is now haunted by night terrors, dreaming of the cold stare Ricardo wore when erasing his enemies. The agonizing question surfaces. Did the hands that cradled her face also steal breath from others? The tragic answer is yes. She twisted her mind into knots, forcing herself to love a phantom built on cruelty. But the naive girl from the altar is dead. In her place stands a woman burdened with devastating clarity. Then a ghost reaches out. A sealed envelope arrives at her lawyer's desk, penned in the careful handwriting of the underworld king himself. The lesson here is simple. The truth, no matter how much we try to bury it in the dark, will always eventually demand to be seen. Ricardo's letter is an echo from the abyss. He begins not with an apology, but with a cold admission that his sorries are just useless ash. He confesses that 1,000 letters could never wash away his sins. Then comes the agonizing truth. He married her simply because she made his hollow chest feel human. Imagine a man raised in a desolate underworld, taught from birth that every soul is a bargaining chip, and every smile is a hidden blade. To a man like him, love was nothing more than an open invitation to an early grave. This leaves us with an unsettling lesson. A toxic environment fundamentally rewrites your soul. Even the most ruthless men pulling the strings of the city are often just broken, terrified children hiding behind a grand facade of absolute power. The ink on the page reveals the fragile core of a monster. He writes that when she looked at him, she did not see the syndicate shadow. She saw the man beneath. She found the single ember of decency he buried under a lifetime of ambition. He bleeds his confession onto the paper, admitting he still loves her for that grace. But love alone cannot silence a demon. His tragic flaw was thinking he could lock his violent world in a box while living in the warmth of their home. He fought his cycle of violence and lost. Morphing back into the nightmare, she fled. The ink leaves us with a harsh but necessary lesson. You can never build walls high enough to separate your darkness from your light. The violent shadows you hide will always eventually bleed through and consume the things you love the most. He closes the letter not with a desperate plea, but with a crushing surrender. He wants her to understand one final truth. His betrayal was never a reflection of her worth. It was the result of his own fractured soul and his inability to be the shield she deserved. He writes the hardest words a proud man can bear, admitting she deserves a life untouched by his chaos. Alessia reads the heavy words 3 times, her face a mask of stone. She seals it in a drawer and walks into the daylight as if her chest is not quietly caving in. But fate has its own cruel timing. 3 weeks early, the sudden rush of water in her living room shatters the silence. The lesson is undeniable. No matter how meticulously we plan our escape, life will always arrive unannounced and force our hand. This is where the world narrows down to blinding lights and sheer survival. The hospital room is a blur of shouting nurses and crashing waves of pain. Her mother, at best from Pren, form a desperate shield around her bed during the longest 12 hours of her life. Yet in those hollow moments between the agony, her mind betrays her, slipping right back to Ricardo. She is not thinking of the ruthless crime boss, but the missing father, the man who should be gripping her hand, but who traded his family for the crown of the criminal underworld. Beneath the hardened shell of her rage, a profound grief quietly breaks her. It forces us to acknowledge a devastating reality. The sinister choices made in the dark will eventually strip you of the brightest, most sacred moments of your life. As rain lashes the hospital window, she grieves the life she thought she was building. But at 3:47 in the morning, the quiet cry of baby Juliana cuts straight through the sorrow. 6 pounds, 8 ounces, crowned with dark hair, and bearing the sharp features of the man she left behind. The moment Alessia pulls that fragile newborn to her chest, the orbit of her universe realigns. When Juliana blinks up with those hauntingly familiar eyes, Alessia feels her heart break and heal in the exact same heartbeat. Suddenly, the bitter divorce, the hitmen, the lingering dread, it all fades into meaningless background noise. The lesson is profoundly simple. Sometimes the arrival of a pure, unwritten chapter is the only thing that teaches you what truly matters. Staring down at her newborn daughter, she weaves an unbreakable oath, promising to be her shield and promising to be enough. Fall so fiercely she does not realize she is weeping until her mother gently wipes her cheek. But outside this warm room, the city underbelly is already moving. Within hours, Ricardo knows. He is a ghost who owns the shadows, a boss with ears in every corridor. Banned or not, there was no reality where he missed the dawn of his bloodline. The next morning, he does not arrive as a tyrant. He stands like a phantom in the sterile hallway, dressed in a flawless dark suit. His hollow eyes betray days of sleepless torment. It reminds us of a bitter truth. Power can buy you the entire world, but it can never buy back the precious moments you burned down. You and I have probably felt that chill when a ghost walks in. His sprawling ink stands out sharply against his pale, exhausted neck. He looks like a man who barely survived a car crash. The grandmother spots him first, her voice trembling as she asks if she should call the guards. But Alessia does not flinch. She looks right through the glass and catches his eye. The moment he sees the tiny bundle in her arms, his imposing frame sags, leaning toward a child he has not even met. Against every instinct, she tells her mother to open the door. "Just 5 minutes," she says. He gets one single look. Her mother hates it, but steps aside. Look, offering grace to the person who broke you takes monumental courage. That mercy is never about saving them. It is always about setting yourself free. Let us step inside that hospital room together. Ricardo crosses the threshold like a man walking on broken glass. Every movement is agonizingly slow, terrified that one sudden twitch might shatter this fragile peace. When he speaks, his voice is gravel and rust, barely managing a whispered thank you. But Alessia gives him nothing but winter. She cuts him off, making it absolutely clear that this is not a pardon. He takes 3 heavy steps toward the bed, and the damage is undeniable. Dark circles hollow out his eyes. The hands that casually dismantled criminal empires are trembling violently as he quietly begs to hold his little girl. Never forget this simple truth. Real power is never found in money or street reputations. True power is holding the one thing you are terrified to lose. Every survival instinct in her blood is screaming to pull the child back. The man over her is a walking hurricane. Yet she knows the bitter truth. A child deserves her father, despite the sins he carries. With heavy reluctance, she passes baby Juliana into his arms. The contrast is unbelievable. This hardened architect of violence cradles the infant like she is woven from thin air. His eyes, famous for their merciless calm, flood with immediate warmth. He breathes her name, whispering that it belonged to his grandmother. Alessia quietly replies that she remembers. The crime boss is anchored, completely unable to tear his gaze away from his newborn daughter. Listen closely to this. Sometimes, the absolute most fragile things in this world are exactly what it takes to break the hardest of men. The hospital room is an eerie sanctuary. Ricardo murmurs that their newborn is perfect. Alessia shoots back that the girl has his eyes, praying heaven helps her survive that dark legacy. The silence stretches, broken only by the steady hum of the heart monitors, a tragic portrait of a ruined dynasty. Then Ricardo drops the match. His voice is terrifyingly flat as he promises to sign everything. The divorce papers, full custody. He volunteers for supervised visits, stating he will build whatever walls are necessary to protect them from the monster he has become. Shocked, Alessia simply asks him why. He slowly raises his defeated eyes, and the profound truth settles into her bones. Sometimes, real love means building an inescapable cage for yourself, just so your family can fly. Look closely into the dark eyes of the city's undisputed king, and you will find nothing but a barren wasteland. This feared syndicate leader has been reduced to ashes by a 6-pound infant and a woman who absolutely refuses to break. His deep voice splinters as he confesses she was right. He traded his real family for a cold, empty throne. The agony is raw as he admits his daughter will grow up knowing her father is a monster and she will be entirely right. With quiet reverence, he presses a lingering kiss against the newborn's forehead. Handing the baby back, he swears the war is over, promising no messy courtroom custody battles. The hardest lessons in life always seem to arrive at the exact moment it is too late to change the ending. Stick with me here, because this is exactly where the powerful facade crumbles. He begs for scraps, pleading just to see his child, even if Alacia watches him like a warden. The illusion of the untouchable boss shatters. Riccardo Moretti, the ghost haunting Milan, buries his face in his hands, choking back sobs like a wounded animal. Watching the collapse of this dangerous giant, a tiny crack forms in her armor. It is nowhere near forgiveness, as what he destroyed cannot be rebuilt. Still, she murmurs, she will consider it. He gives one heavy nod before walking into the sterile hallway. True survival often means walking away from the fire, even if it leaves you facing the exhausting, blurry trenches of new motherhood completely alone. Friends form a protective fortress around the house, bringing warm meals and rocking the baby so Alacia can take a hot shower just to feel human again. In the background, the legal machine moves with terrifying speed. True to his word, Riccardo offers zero resistance. He signs his rights away and surrenders full custody. He wires a staggering mountain of wealth, guaranteeing his daughter never struggles. His only reward is 2 brief, supervised visits a month on her home turf. On a cold Tuesday in October, the ink finally dries. The violent storm of their marriage officially dies. The lesson here is quiet but incredibly heavy. Sometimes the absolute greatest act of love is removing yourself entirely from the story so the innocent have a chance to thrive. Staring down at the finalized documents, there is no sweet taste of victory or grand exhale of relief. Alacia just feels gutted. Time is a relentless river, pulling her forward. As Juliana reaches 3 months old, she becomes a quiet blessing. Her easy smiles serve as a lifeline for a mother healing from deep betrayal. Yet fate always has a cruel sense of irony. The infant is becoming a perfect mirror image of the underworld king who broke her heart. She has those same piercing eyes and that sharp, stubborn chin. We must remember that we cannot control the ghosts of our past, but we can always choose to fiercely love the future, standing right in front of us, no matter whose face it happens to wear. When the visitation hour strikes, Riccardo operates with the cold precision of a ticking clock. He knocks exactly on time, and he vanishes the second his hour expires. There is no subtle manipulation, no lingering charm aimed at his former wife. Instead, he simply sheds the skin of an underworld predator. To see a man who commands shadows suddenly folding baby blankets with the gentle hands of a saint is a jarring psychological trip. For hours, his deep, heavy voice, usually meant for issuing threats, fills the halls with old Italian lullabies. Alacia stands just out of sight, watching this stone-cold killer dissolve into pure softness. We have to remember a simple truth here. We all contain contradictions, and sometimes the most dangerous people hold the capacity for unexpected tenderness. Alacia simply cannot reconcile the image in front of her. The tender father resting on her couch bears zero resemblance to the venomous snake who burned their marriage to ash. He does not wear the mask of a criminal kingpin. It feels like inviting a polite ghost into your living room. You and I know how unsettling that is. The fragile rhythm of this new normal holds steady for months until the quiet is violently shattered. Alessia is unwinding with a rare glass of red wine when the front gate buzzer screams. On the security screen, a trembling messenger clutches a sealed envelope. Life teaches us this over and over. Just when you think you have finally secured your peace, the past will always find a new way to knock on your door. The anxious runner whispers that the package holds urgent intelligence about Ricardo. Adrenaline hits her veins as she snatches the envelope. Tearing it open, she finds a glossy photograph of Valentina, the very ghost who poisoned her marriage. The horrific part is that Ricardo is standing right behind her in a clinical hallway, his tattooed hand resting on her arm. The digital timestamp is a total mockery, taken just 3 days ago. Her vision blurs with white-hot rage. She dials her lawyer, shaking with fury and ready to start a bloodbath, but her lawyer tells her to breathe. The lesson here is hard but necessary. When raw anger begs you to react instantly, patience is the only weapon that keeps you from stepping into a carefully laid trap. The attorney lays out the brutal reality. A crime boss like Moretti has countless rivals who would happily detonate his personal life just to watch him bleed. This photograph could be a smoking gun or a clever forgery engineered to spark a syndicate war. They need concrete proof first. We usually expect a betrayed person to feel energized by revenge, but Alessia is utterly drained. The emotional whiplash is breaking her spirit. Rather than throwing gasoline on the fire, she chooses to become a quiet hunter inside her own home. When the next visitation rolls around, she studies his every breath. She searches for the subtle tells she spent a decade memorizing. Life constantly reminds us that quiet observation always reveals far more truth than the loudest confrontation. The air feels uncomfortably heavy tonight. Ricardo looks as he always did, yet entirely different. He is consumed by the baby, radiating a tender devotion he never offered Alessia during their shattered marriage. Her mind whispers the cruel truth. He used to look at her exactly like that right before the ultimate betrayal. She lets that heavy pain sit for an agonizing week. Finally, when the child is safely asleep, she corners him in the quiet hallway. He freezes, caught completely off guard. Without flinching, she shoves the damning photograph directly against his chest. A violent storm of terror washes over his hardened features. Stick with me here, because this proves a simple rule. The ghosts of our past mistakes always choose to return right when we finally lower our guard. Confusion flashes in his dark eyes before he truly processes the picture. Instantly, the chilling shadow of the ruthless mob boss returns, reminding Alessia exactly how dangerous he is. He demands to know who sent it, his voice dropping into a dangerous rumble. She coldly replies that it arrived with no name, throwing the accusation right back at him. An agonizing silence stretches between them until he finally breaks. Dragging a trembling hand through his hair, he admits the photo is real, but the context is a twisted lie. Valentina is dying of severe cancer. With zero money to her name, she begged him to fund her final chance at life. The lesson here is incredibly simple. Sometimes the deepest and most human truths are hidden far beneath the surface of our absolute worst assumptions. Alessia stands there, stunned by the sheer weight of his words. She asks if he seriously expects her to swallow that tragic story. He stares into her soul and tells her not to believe a single word. Instead, he urges her to verify the medical bills herself. He openly confesses that he destroyed her trust and deserves absolutely zero sympathy. But then she asks the heaviest question. Why spend a fortune saving the woman who helped burn their family to the ground? His response is chillingly quiet. "She is dying," he whispers, "and no matter the sins they committed, nobody deserves to face death alone." He is genuinely trying to become a better man. The life lesson here is stark. Real change only happens in the dark, when nobody is watching to give you the applause. Alessia stares right into his soul, searching frantically for even a single hint of deception. To her absolute shock, she cannot find a trace of a lie. She tells him straight to his face that she will fact-check every word, and if he is playing games, he loses his daughter forever. Ricardo just steps back, completely cool, and tells her to go ahead. And you know what happens next. The hospital actually confirms everything. Valentina Rossi is battling stage 3 cancer, and an entirely anonymous donor is footing the massive medical bills. Let us take a moment to look at this together. The simple life lesson here is to always trust, but rigorously verify. Sometimes the naked truth is far stranger and much more complicated than the comforting lies we tell ourselves. A ruthless mob boss funding the survival of his former mistress is a profound psychological puzzle. Alessia is losing her mind trying to decode his motives. Is Ricardo still playing a twisted game, or is he actually trying to plant one pure seed of goodness in a lifetime of violence? During his next visit, she stops hunting for deception. Instead, she observes this deeply broken paradox of a man. The terrifying crime boss cradles his infant daughter as if she were made of fragile glass. He hums to her in a soft rhythm that his street soldiers could never possibly imagine. Here is a simple life lesson for us to ponder. The human soul is complicated, and sometimes the most hardened monsters fiercely protect a fragile softness we never thought possible. When little Juliana begins to cry, this ruthless kingpin paces the floor, rocking her gently until her breathing settles into a quiet rhythm. There is absolutely no performance happening here. His love for his daughter is entirely pure. Watching him sway, Alessia is struck by a heavy realization. Can a man be a completely toxic husband, yet remain a deeply devoted father? The question haunts her. Soon, the baby's first Christmas arrives, bringing a peaceful evening with just her mother and a few loyal friends. Ricardo is completely locked out of this memory, permanently banned from the holidays to protect the child from his chaos. Remember this simple life lesson. You are allowed to build firm boundaries to protect your peace, even when it leaves someone you once loved out in the cold. A package arrives at her front door. There is no return address, just her name in the sharp handwriting she would recognize anywhere. Inside rests a rare first edition of her favorite Italian poetry collection. She had whispered about wanting this exact book years ago. Tucked between the faded pages is a note from Ricardo. He confesses that he remembers every dream she ever shared, but tragically forgot how to show that they mattered. Alessia stands frozen, her fingers trembling against the worn leather binding. She is certain she no longer loves him, yet her heart aches at the ghost of what they used to be. We must learn this simple life lesson. True attention to someone's soul is a powerful force, and the quiet words you spoke years ago can carry the absolute heaviest weight today. It is not hatred she feels anymore. It is that agonizing middle ground where your heart simply forgets how to beat. As the new year settles, a strange peace forms. Alessia no longer watches his every move during his visits. Slowly, Ricardo starts slipping heavy confessions into the quiet room. He is tearing down his dark empire. He is pulling away from the brutal violence and surrendering his crown to build a clean life. He is desperate to ensure his little girl never grows up suffocated by his toxic legacy. When Alessia asks why he is on his deepest secret, he looks down and admits he just wants her to stop looking at him like a monster. Here is our final quiet life lesson. Rebuilding broken trust always requires painful, unwavering effort long after the damage is done. He whispers he is not ready to surrender hope, but the fragile peace shatters in a heartbeat. Alessia is holding her baby when the phone rings. A freezing voice addresses her as Mrs. Moretti. The stranger delivers a terrifying message, demanding she pass a violent greeting to Ricardo from Victor Anton. They threaten the innocent baby for the dark sins of the father before the line goes dead. Alessia is paralyzed by dread. She does not dial the police. She dials Ricardo, because when the underworld comes hunting, you need a monster to hold the door. The life lesson here is stark. When you are drowning in deep waters, you must swallow your pride and call the one person equipped to fight the current, regardless of your painful past. He answers on the first ring. With panic choking her throat, she breathes the name Victor Anton. The line plunges into a terrifying silence. When Ricardo finally speaks, his voice is devoid of humanity. It is the cold, flat sound of a man preparing to murder. He commands her to lock the doors. 12 minutes later, the violent scream of tires tears through the street. Ricardo does not arrive alone. He brings the crushing weight of his entire empire. Dark vehicles block the road as armed enforcers flood the shadows. Ricardo bursts through her door, moving like a dark hurricane, ready to drown the world in blood to protect his child. Let us remember this simple life lesson. True devotion is measured in the brutal moments of crisis, showing up instantly when the shadows fall, no questions asked. His eyes lock onto Alessia and the child, scanning them with desperate urgency. Once certain of their safety, the frantic father vanishes, replaced by the cold syndicate Don. He demands to hear every single syllable of the call. As she whispers the threat, Ricardo's face hardens into unyielding stone. He reveals the grim reality. Victor Anton is a ruthless rival from a Russian crime family who just crossed the ultimate line by targeting a child. Ricardo steps close, his voice dropping to a heavy command. They must leave tonight and vanish into his secure fortress, far away from the bleeding streets. We cannot ignore this vital life lesson. The violent sins of our past always cast long shadows, and old debts will inevitably return to haunt the innocent people we love if left unburied. Alessia rejects the command instantly. She reminds him she signed those custody papers specifically to shield their child from this exact underworld nightmare. Ricardo physically flinches, a proud king shattered by the sharp truth. He quietly admits his failure, confessing he underestimated his enemies. He pleads with her to let him take control of their survival. This pulls a bitter laugh from her throat, since absolute control was always his toxic poison. But then she looks deeper. Beneath the hardened shell of the boss, she sees the raw terror of a father begging for his little girl's life. Knowing full well that Alessia despises him, the crucial life lesson here is clear. Pride is a deadly poison during a crisis. You must be willing to swallow your ego to survive the storm. Tonight, you and I are walking down a very dark road together. Picture Ricardo, a man who usually breaks people to get his way, now practically on his knees, is begging to protect his family. As the heavy silence suffocates them, baby Juliana lets out a sharp, shattered cry. Alessia pulls the trembling child close, her heart hammering against her ribs, and makes a split-second choice. 24 hours. That is all he gets. Ricardo exhales a breath carrying years of regret, sweeping them away to a shadow-draped villa tucked high in the hills of Milan. It is a modern fortress of steel and stone, complete with a safe nursery untouched by the underworld. A little late-night wisdom for you. Always have a sanctuary in mind, because you never know when your world will suddenly collapse. Once inside the massive walls, he leaves them alone in the quiet. Alessia paces the hardwood floors, tracing the cold glow of the security monitors. On screen, Ricardo transforms back into the ruthless general of his syndicate, directing his soldiers without eating or resting. He is a machine locked on a violent frequency. At 3 in the morning, the house is dead silent. She wanders down and finds him in the dim kitchen light. His suit jacket is abandoned, sleeves rolled high to reveal the ink of a brutal life. His exhausted eyes are fixed on a glass of whiskey he refuses to drink. His first words are a gravelly whisper, asking only if their daughter is safe. Alessia freezes. True dedication is exactly what happens in these lonely hours when absolutely nobody else is watching you. She steps into the room and asks about his next move. His voice is a low rumble as he explains his men are hunting the Russian boss. He catches himself before describing the violence, knowing she despises his underworld, yet the adrenaline of the night still courses through Alessia. Exhausted, she pulls out a chair and sits right beside him. Ricardo stares at her, completely paralyzed. He cannot fathom she willingly chose to sit this close. She mutters a quick warning not to overthink it, and he nods slowly. They sit together in the thick velvet of the night, finding a strange shield in the heavy silence. Here is a very difficult truth. Sometimes the person who completely broke your world is the only one who truly understands the exact storm you are trying to survive. The ice cracks when he asks why she trusted him over the authorities. Alessia does not sugarcoat it. She tells him the police are just paper shields against a monster like Anton. Looking at the man who shattered her vows, she admits that while he was a terrible husband, he is a master of his dark trade. When her child is in danger, he is the only weapon sharp enough threat. Then comes the crushing blow. She reveals she no longer hates him. Hate requires a burning fire she simply cannot maintain. She is left only with exhaustion and a cold disappointment. This quiet confession cuts him deeper than any physical blade ever could. Apathy is the final, lonely stage of grief. When someone entirely loses the energy to fight you, you know the connection is already dead. He downs the whiskey, letting its burn mirror the heavy truth who is finally ready to confess. His voice drops into the dim kitchen as he swears his love was never a prop in a crime family's illusion. She was the fragile light that made him yearn for goodness. Alessia meets his gaze with exhausted eyes, asking the only question that matters. Why didn't you choose to be better? The room falls dead. He whispers that goodness is a weight he cannot bear, admitting that beneath his empire he is just a coward. Alessia looks at the city's most feared predator and sees only a shattered man. Forgiveness remains a distant horizon, yet the ice finally starts to crack. It is a harsh reality we all face eventually. Admitting our deepest flaws is agonizing, but it is the only real bridge we have toward genuine redemption. 3 suffocating days pass before the threat is entirely eradicated. Erased from the board, Alessia refuses to ask how Ricardo and his syndicate disposed of Victor Anton, understanding that ignorance is a necessary shield when entangled with the underworld. On the 4th morning, Ricardo appears at her door, carrying the weight of a century without sleep. His voice is gravel as he delivers the news. They are finally safe. Stick with me, because this is where their dynamic gets fascinating. The silence that follows is thick with the reality of what comes next. She studies her ex-husband, recognizing a terrifying paradox. a monster who moonlights as her guardian angel. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the people who break your heart are the only ones who can protect it. Alessia sets her boundaries, demanding their innocent daughter experience a real father, not a supervised ghost visiting on weekends. Ricardo looks as though he has been struck. She admits, her voice softening, that a man willing to stay awake for 3 days to shield his child deserves more than a handful of miserable hours each month. In a moment of raw clarity, she confesses that her obsession with making him pay for his dark history was only suffocating their daughter's future. She isn't offering complete absolution just yet, but she is finally acknowledging his effort to change. We can all learn something vital from her realization in this kitchen. Her clutching onto pure anger only serves to poison your own tomorrow, and letting go of heavy grudges is the first step toward finding real peace. Ricardo stares at her, entirely disarmed, as if she has just handed him a pardon from death row. When he quietly asks what she needs, her answer is a demand for bulletproof honesty. No more shadows, no more buried threats. If he lies, she and their daughter will vanish like smoke. He nods, agreeing to every term, and for the first time in years, she actually believes the man behind the Mafia crown. They, exhausted by the emotional whiplash, they retreat into the quiet of the safe house for another week, simply because Alessia is too drained to face the outside world. It shows how destruction paves the way for growth. When everything falls apart, hitting rock bottom can actually provide the most solid foundation for building a completely new life from the rubble. Their life doesn't suddenly morph into a cheesy romantic film, but they do forge a genuine ceasefire in their long, exhausting war. We see them sharing quiet meals, passing the baby back and forth in the middle of the night, and speaking without the hostile presence of lawyers. The city's most lethal crime boss is now quietly attending therapy and flipping through dog-eared parenting books. When she finally asks what sparked this profound shift, his answer is devastatingly simple. He looks at her and admits it was the terrifying reality of losing her completely. It is a quiet moment that reveals a universal truth about the human condition. Profound, lasting change rarely comes from comfort. It happens when you finally realize you are about to lose the only thing that truly matters. He swears to her, his voice stripped of its usual commanding edge, that there have been no other women since the day she walked out. He explains that Valentina was merely a charity case, a loose end from his past, and nothing more. Naturally, Alessia's walls go right back up with skepticism. Yet, instead of erupting into his typical defensive rage, Ricardo remains completely calm. He doesn't demand her immediate trust. He simply asks her to watch his actions over time and decide for herself if he is a man worth believing again. It is a subtle shift, but an incredibly powerful one for his character arc. We often get caught up in promises, but the lesson here remains universally true. In love and in life, consistent actions will always speak far louder than any beautifully crafted words. Alessia is slowly, meticulously putting herself back together. She is crafting a completely new identity, one that exists entirely outside the suffocating shadow of being a mafia wife. She is reclaiming her own narrative, and her dynamic with Ricardo, it is evolving into something entirely unrecognizable from their chaotic past. He is a constant, quiet presence in her home now, spending hours sitting on the floor with their child, doing the mundane work of being a father. He is no longer ruling through fear. He is leading through steady, daily effort. It shows us that there are no quick fixes for a shattered foundation. The real lesson here is simple, but incredibly profound. True healing is never a dramatic overnight transformation. It takes immense patience and an abundance of time. Let's look at this scene, piece by piece. Alacia holds his gaze, refusing to sugarcoat the devastation between them. She lays out a heavy reality. Fixing shattered trust is not a quick apology. It is a grueling, years-long excavation of their past mistakes. She forces him to stare at the sheer weight of what he broke, but his response strips away all defenses. He tells her that, despite the absolute wreckage they are standing in, he refuses to seek an easier path with someone new. This reveals a quiet but powerful truth about human connection. Real love does not pack its bags the moment the house catches fire. It rolls up its sleeves and commits to the bitter, exhausting work of rebuilding, knowing the ashes are just the beginning of something real. Ricardo knows with absolute unwavering certainty that Alacia is completely strong on her own now. She does not need him to survive, and she certainly does not need him to feel whole. The days of her depending on his protection or his syndicate are long gone. But deep down, he holds on to this fragile hope that, even without needing him, she might wake up one day and simply choose him. When he asks where they stand, Alacia just looks at him and admits she does not know. That uncertainty is the heaviest punishment he could carry. The simple truth of life is that you cannot force someone to love you again after breaking them. You can only give them the space to heal and hope they invite you back into their world. You and I both know this is not some cheap romance novel where love magically fixes bullet holes and broken trust overnight. But tonight, in this quiet room, it is a start. And Alacia is learning that a fragile start is sometimes all we get in life. The next few months blur into this strange, careful dance. They are no longer at war, but they are definitely not at peace. Ricardo keeps every single promise he makes. He arrives exactly when he says he will. He is steady, present, playing the role of the man she dreamed of when she first said her vows. Listen to me on this one. Do not obsess over securing the perfect, flawless ending. Just focus on showing up today and making an honest, grounded start. The rest will slowly build from there. The strangest part for her is how deeply unsettling his new behavior truly is. Alacia has the sharpest instincts in the world, honed by years surviving next to a mobster. If he were playing a game, she would see right through the mask. But watching a ruthless enforcer show pure, raw sincerity, that flips her entire universe upside down. One rainy evening, while he is patiently helping baby Juliana stand up, he catches Alacia watching him from the doorway. She claims she is just observing. He does not flinch. He just looks at her and asks for her honest verdict. Is he finally a changed man, or just the most talented liar breathing? Here is your life lesson. When your trust is shattered, it is completely fine to question every move until the truth is proven. He looks right at her and says he has changed, but he also admits he is an excellent liar. It is a chillingly honest answer. The man ran a criminal empire, so of course he knows exactly how to manipulate a room. But he swears he is choosing to be bare with her now. He tells her he understands why she analyzes his every breath, searching for the hidden trap. Then he does something shocking. He apologizes, not just for the betrayal, but for forcing her to live in this exhausting state of pure paranoia. While he says it, little Juliana takes 2 shaky steps and falls over. The lesson tonight is a heavy one. Owning your past mistakes is a good start, but recognizing the lasting paranoia you caused in someone else is what proves you have truly grown. The little girl sits on the thick rug, looking completely surprised by her own sudden fall. In that fleeting second, Ricardo forgets his dark, violent world entirely. The syndicate, the money, the blood, all of it vanishes. His voice actually cracks with emotion as he whispers that she just took her very first steps. Instinct takes over, and they both lunge forward at the exact step with me into the quiet ruins of a shattered marriage. The divorce papers are signed, leaving only their daughter as the living evidence of what once was. After Ricardo leaves, Alessia sits alone in the darkness. A glass of dark red wine rests in her hand as she replays a fleeting moment. A simple brush of his knuckles against hers, and her nervous system betrayed her. Her mind screams of ruin, yet her pulse hammers a frantic rhythm. She hates that she still feels the magnetic pull of this walking disaster. She remembers the ghost of his devotion, the cruel illusion of forever. The hardest truth we all eventually face is that your mind and your heart rarely play on the same team when the past comes knocking at your door. Let us look closely at the war raging inside Alessia right now. Her memories are acting like double agents, whispering that perhaps this kingpin has actually found his soul. She wonders if this quiet man is the real Ricardo and the betrayer was just a nightmare. But she walked into that trap once before, leading her right to that bedroom door. Pregnant and watching her life burn. She finishes her wine and surrenders to sleep. Time drifts forward to Juliana and her first birthday. It is a small, carefully guarded celebration. Then, the shadow returns. Ricardo asks to attend. After a bitter internal debate, she grants him entry, but forces a rigid 2-hour window. We must remember this lesson. Sometimes you have to build absolute, rigid boundaries just to survive and protect your own fragile peace. Her rules were incredibly clear. Stay for the cake, then vanish. But the Mafia Don arrives early, and he has completely stripped away his armor. The tailored suits are gone, replaced by worn, dark denim and sleeves rolled up over his faded syndicate ink. For the first time in forever, he looks like a breathing man instead of a phantom of the underworld. He brings an absurd, massive cloud of pink and silver balloons, filling his car with fragile color. Alessia tries to pierce the moment, coldly reminding him that a baby will never remember this day. Ricardo answers with a quiet, devastating sincerity. He says that he will remember, and there will be photographs to prove her father existed. Showing up for the people you love, even when it hurts, is the true currency of a meaningful life. The feared Don looks at her, and you and I can see genuine hope flickering in his dark eyes. Alea softly admits she wants her daughter to know her father. But Ricardo shifts the weight of the room. His voice drops low as he asks what she actually wants for herself. The air grows incredibly heavy. Alessia shatters a little, confessing she is entirely lost. She wanted a clean break, a life erased of his name. Yet here he stands, rewriting the script of their tragedy. She is drowning, unable to stitch together the monster who destroyed her with the gentle man holding balloons. Ricardo meets her gaze and whispers that they are the very same man. We all carry conflicting versions of ourselves, and accepting that dark duality in the people we love is a truly heavy cross to bear. He lets the bright balloons drift upward as he delivers a brutal dose of reality that he does not flinch from his past sins. He openly admits he was the architect of her destruction, the absolute monster who tore her world apart. No shields, no excuses. But he insists he is also the man bleeding to earn redemption. Both shadows exist within the exact same flesh. Alessia trembles, asking how she can ever trust the good man will outlive the demon. What happens if the darkness swallows him again? His response is a cold blade of honesty. He tells her she cannot know. He admits his vows are currently nothing but dead air. You can never erase the profound damage you leave behind. The only path forward is to own the wreckage, without hiding behind the comfort of empty guarantees. With his promises burned away, the only currency Ricardo has left is sheer consistency. He swears to simply remain, letting the steady rhythm of his actions slowly outweigh his violent past. Alessia warns him with a trembling voice that such forgiveness could take a lifetime. The mob boss stares deep into her wounded soul and quietly replies that time is the one thing he has. Even if her walls never fall, he refuses to walk away. Before the gravity of his words can settle, the front door opens and the real world rushes in. The party begins, loud and chaotic. Little Juliana is passed between friends, oblivious to the war her parents are fighting. Words are a cheap currency in the dark. Showing up, day after day, is the only way to genuinely rebuild a shattered trust. The apartment buzzes with life, but Ricardo intentionally fades into the shadows, stripping away the aura of the untouchable boss. The tension in the room is palpable. Alessia's mother offers him nothing but frost, and her friend looks ready to draw blood. But yet, Ricardo swallows every bitter glare without his usual armor. He understands that absorbing their venom is his penance. As the evening ends, the feared Don silently begins gathering the empty cups. Alessia weakly tells him to leave it, but he refuses, seeing the exhaustion anchoring her bones. They drift into a quiet choreography of cleaning, moving in the synchronized rhythm of two ghosts who once shared a heartbeat. True humility means enduring the pain of your consequences without a single complaint. The apartment sits in a heavy midnight silence. Little Juliana is asleep, leaving Alessia and Ricardo to finish the slow birthday cleanup. The air between them is electric, thick with layers of old pain. Ricardo lingers by the door, totally frozen. He murmurs that he should go, yet he refuses to move. She softly agrees. He tries to speak, but she raises a trembling hand, begging him not to add any more weight to the night. She braces herself, expecting him to pour out his heavy soul. Instead, this once ruthless boss drops his final defenses. He simply whispers a quiet thank you for letting him be part of her day. Let us unpack this together. When you have entirely shattered someone's trust, the only real bridge back is a quiet, deeply humble display of gratitude. Alessia let out a fragile breath, believing she had dodged a bullet. She whispered a quiet welcome, but then the hammer fell. Ricardo looked right into her tired eyes and added that he loved her. Just like that, the careful boundary shattered. His voice was thick, with heavy regret, as he apologized. He confessed he could not watch her be an incredible mother without speaking the truth. She tried to stop him, but he stepped toward the door, asking for nothing. He simply needed her to know he had never stopped loving her. He was just too broken to show it properly. He walked out into the dark. The second that heavy door clicked shut, Alessia collapsed in tears. We learn that the words we are most afraid to hear are often the ones that crack our hardened hearts wide open. She sat there, frozen, terrified by the thought that she might be falling for the mafia boss all over again. As weeks dragged on, Alessia did what any of us do when running from our deepest fears. She buried herself in work to avoid him. But here is where the story shifts. Ricardo did not push her. He only texted about their daughter, showed up exactly on time, and left on the dot. He gave her absolute space. His quiet respect for her boundaries was driving her crazy, proving he was finally putting her needs ahead of his own. The dangerous man she knew was actively becoming a trustworthy partner. The hardest lesson in life is realizing that people actually can change, and it is terrifying when they finally do, because it leaves us with no more excuses to hide. She did not want him to be a good man. She wanted to stay furious, because holding on to bitter anger always feels safer than risking a shattered heart again. But carrying that heavy emotional armor is exhausting. Then, on a quiet Wednesday, her phone rang. Ricardo sounded completely hollowed out. He pleaded with her to come to the hospital. He assured her Juliana was fine, but he desperately needed her there. A cold dread washed over her. That 20-minute drive was a blur of pure, blinding panic for Alessia. Her mind raced through every violent mafia scenario imaginable. Was it a rival gang? A hit gone wrong? Life constantly proves that the delicate peace we take for granted can vanish in a single phone call, dragging us right back into the chaos we tried to outrun. Sprinting into the cardiac ward, she found the untouchable mafia boss, sitting alone in a pale hallway. His face was a haunted grey, his tattooed hands locked together like he was begging for a miracle. He looked up, revealing something that shattered her reality. Alessia, tears. His voice cracked as he confessed his father was dying. Understand the bitter history here. Domenico was a terrifying figure who treated Alessia like a bad investment. Furious, his son married for love instead of a syndicate alliance. She never grasped Ricardo's desperate need for that cold man's approval. Yet, watching her ruthless former husband break down changed everything. True grief is the great equalizer. It strips away our powerful titles and heavy armor, leaving us as nothing more than frightened children crying in the dark. The deepest wounds we carry are almost always inflicted by the ones who raised us. He had a massive heart attack yesterday, Ricardo admitted, his voice stripped of its usual power. He is refusing treatment, says he has lived long enough. Alessia froze, her mind flashing back to the cruelty the old man had subjected her to. Then came the twist. He asked to see you. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away from the monster who built her misery. But looking into Ricardo's exhausted eyes, her iron defenses cracked. "Okay," she murmured. "It teaches us a vital lesson. True empathy often requires us to lower our shields for the very people who forced us to build them in the first place. Let's step into that cold hospital room together and examine the fall of an empire." Domenico, the ultimate mafia godfather, lay tethered to a symphony of humming machines. Once the architect of an entire underworld, he was now a frail figure dissolving into the bleached bedsheets. His body was failing, but his eyes retained the sharp edge of a predator. When he called out to Alessia, she gave him zero comfort, stating directly she was only there to honor his grieving son. Surprisingly, Domenico offered a weak smile, respecting her refusal to play games. It proves a humbling point we all eventually face. You can spend decades hoarding absolute power, but we all leave this earth in the exact same fragile state. The shadows in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating, as the dying boss forced Alessia to listen. Looking her dead in the eye, Domenico confessed his utter disdain for her. He had viewed Ricardo's choice to marry a civilian as a tactical error, believing romantic love was a fatal flaw. But then, the towering figure of the syndicate admitted something shocking. He had been entirely wrong. Domenico took full responsibility for poisoning Ricardo's mind, actively grooming him to view family as nothing more than pieces on a chessboard. Alessia stood absolutely still. It is a profound tragedy that our clearest moments of clarity often arrive only when we are entirely out of time to repair the damage we caused. Domenico laid bare the ugly truth of toxic masculinity within the syndicate. He confessed to teaching Ricardo that a wife was merely a bloodline vessel, handing his son the psychological tools to justify his betrayals. But then the old man revealed his true motive. He swore that Ricardo had completely changed. His proof? The ruthlessly cold air, trained to bury every emotion, had just spent 3 hours at his deathbed, weeping and confessing his deepest failures. Domenico saw his son break simply because he wanted to be worthy of Alessia. It shows us that vulnerability is never a sign of weakness. It is the absolute loudest declaration of a person's courage. Gasping for breath, the old Don described how Ricardo had finally dismantled the iron walls between them, exposing the flawed man hiding beneath the armor. Alessia felt a hard lump form in her throat. Then, Domenico dropped the ultimate truth. Ricardo genuinely loves her. He was not talking about the possessive control native to their crime family, but a purifying love that makes a corrupted man desperate to wash his hands clean. Reaching out, Domenico begged her to give his son one final chance. Alessia whispered it was not that simple. Yet, his plea forces us to confront a beautiful reality. When love survives a brutal betrayal, it proves our darkest mistakes can forge our strongest bonds. Do not let my garbage parenting choices rob you of a lifetime of happiness, Domenico murmured, melting back into his pillows. Alessia stood frozen, letting the heavy gravity of that confession settle into her bones. After thanking him for finally seeing her as a human being, she stepped into the harsh light of the hallway. Ricardo was pacing, his face tight with stress. When she told him his father was sorry, the tension shifted. For the first time in over a year, Alessia reached out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. Underneath her fingers, the terrifying crime boss was trembling. This quiet interaction shows us that a single, gentle moment of grace can instantly alter the course of a broken history. She told him firmly that she was going to stay right there. When Ricardo quietly suggested she did not have to, she shut him down, urging him to go say goodbye. Sinking into the cold plastic chair, her mind began to race. Understanding that Ricardo's toxic behavior was programmed by a ruthless father did not magically erase her pain, but suddenly, she understood how a man could love her fiercely while still tearing her world apart. We are all heavily molded by the trauma passed down to us, but the true measure of our character is whether we choose to break that mold. Alessia did not know if this new version of him would last, but she felt a genuine desire to stick around and find out. 4 days later, Domenico took his final breath. The funeral was a masterclass in mafia theater. Hundreds of associates in tailored suits crowded the cathedral, blending corporate wealth with underworld grime in a display of performative grief. Alessia told herself she was only attending for her daughter. But you and I both know the human heart is far meshier. She was really there for Ricardo. Grief is a suffocating weight to carry alone, and she remembered how fiercely he used to protect her. Even after the profound betrayal, a quiet part of her soul still cared. Extending basic empathy to the very people who broke our hearts is arguably the purest reflection of a beautiful, unyielding spirit. Stick with me here, because this is where the emotional core of the story completely shifts. Standing in the back of the cathedral, Alessia watched Ricardo approach the microphone. His eulogy was incredibly raw, exposing his conflicted history with a father who ordered hits but also tucked him into bed. Mid-sentence, Ricardo's dark eyes locked onto hers. The transformation was instant. The lethal tension of the air simply evaporated, leaving behind a man desperately searching for his anchor. She later found him hiding in the shadows of the gardens. It perfectly captures the humbling reality of grief. Grief violently strips away all our heavy armor, leaving us as nothing more than frightened souls. He sat completely frozen on a weathered stone bench, his eyes fixated on the faded ink across his knuckles. Alessia quietly sat down right next to him. They did not speak. They just let the suffocating silence stretch until he finally scraped out a broken thank you. He knew she owed his family absolutely nothing. Without missing a beat, she reminded him he was still the father of her child. He had thrown her a lifeline once, and she was simply balancing the scales. Looking up with bloodshot eyes, he asked if she was only there out of obligation. Giving an honest answer felt like walking barefoot on glass. Keeping your guard permanently raised against someone you love will drain your soul faster than anything else. She finally let all the suppressed pain spill out into the cool night air. She was exhausted from carrying the crushing weight of her anger, tired of waiting for his next betrayal just to justify her emotional fortress. He nodded slowly, admitting that sounded like absolute hell. She confessed that dropping her walls felt like stepping blindly off a cliff. If he destroyed her trust again, there would be nothing left to rebuild. Ricardo locked his eyes onto hers with a desperate intensity. He swore on his life to fight for her every single day. Here was a feared crime boss, stripping away his massive ego. True strength is having the courage to surrender your ego entirely for the person you love. Ricardo stood there, stripped of his underworld armor, pleading for one final chance to prove his loyalty. Alessia met him with an ironclad ultimatum. If she risked her wounded heart and he failed, she would finally have the total closure needed to walk away. She dismantled the dangerous fantasy, pulling him from his guilt into the cold light of reality. He surrendered the power to her, abandoning his old toxic manipulation. She agreed to stay, but the walls were absolute. They would move at a painfully slow pace, strictly as friends. One lie, and he would be a ghost. No second chances. She studied his face, using every survival instinct forged in the Mafia world, searching for any twitch of hesitation. Setting rigid boundaries is the only true way to protect your peace. It is the uncomfortable truth that saves you from drowning. She searched his expression and found zero trace of deception. All she saw was a raw, terrifying sincerity. Letting out a heavy breath, she gave him the one word he was starving for. Okay. They would try. But this effort was not about grand romantic gestures. It meant sitting at a kitchen table on a Tuesday night, breaking bread as a family. It meant handling their little girl's future directly, rather than hiding behind lawyers. They were meticulously gluing together a friendship that the cycle of violence had burned to ash. Ricardo displayed a quiet patience you rarely see in a man from his brutal syndicate. When her old scars flared up, he did not retreat. He simply sat there, absorbing her verbal hits without making a single excuse. Sometimes the most powerful way to love someone is just holding the space for their anger until the heavy storm finally passes. When she retreated, he respectfully gave her space. When she reached out, he was right beside her. She interrogated him about his darkest secrets, pressing him on the women from his past before Valenti. He looked her dead in the eye and admitted there were many. He explained how his father had conditioned him, teaching him to keep his violent street life completely walled off from his family. He took full ownership of the wreckage he caused. When asked if those shadows were still around, he swore that the moment she left, he buried that life entirely. She was not naive, quietly working her own underworld connections to verify his claims. Trusting sweet words is easy, but verifying actions is what actually keeps you safe. It is a harsh truth we all eventually learn. Yet against the odds, every single word he spoke turned out to be completely real. Stick with me, because this is where the dynamic shifts. It happened in such tiny fractions she barely noticed the heavy iron falling from her shoulders. By their daughter's second birthday, the room was filled with the safe life Alessia had built. Ricardo was no unwanted ghost in the corner. He was in the center of the chaos, catching toddlers and pouring juice, moving in perfect rhythm with her. They moved through the noise with the quiet chemistry of two survivors finding the same beat. Her mother watched them, whispering about how natural they looked together. Alessia offered a guarded smile, admitting things were improving, but she grounded herself quickly. She still did not trust him. We all learn the hard way that trust is a fragile glass house. It takes years to build, a single second to shatter, and a painfully long lifetime to carefully rebuild. The heavy clouds were breaking, bringing light back to Alessia's face. Her mother pulled her close, seeing how she radiated peace now that the dark shadows of her past were fading. Yet, mothers always sense danger, reminding her to keep her shield raised. Hours later, the balloons were deflated, and little Juliana was fast asleep. Ricardo lingered by the front door, a heavy silence stretching between them. He tested the invisible line, murmuring that he should head out, offering an easy escape. Up until this exact second, they had played their platonic roles flawlessly.
Alessia felt the sudden, terrifying drum beat of her own heart.
She took a deep breath, stepped over the edge, and asked him to stay for just one drink. The beautiful thing about the human heart is its stubborn strength. True healing begins the moment you find the courage to let the right energy back into your life. Picture this quiet room, okay? Because you and I are going to sit with this moment together. Alessia poured the dark wine, the glass trembling slightly against the bottle. They sat on the very same couch where she once cried until her lungs burned. Now, those old ghosts were gone. They talked in soft voices about their little girl and the mundane workday, carefully mapping a future without sudden moves. Then his rough fingers brushed against hers. The wild part, she did not pull away. The connection was a lightning strike, heavy with the weight of their tragic history. He whispered that he missed this, just breathing the same air without demanding a single thing. Swallowing her pride, she confessed she missed it too. She squeezed his hand, quietly warning him not to push the boundary. Sometimes, simply admitting you miss someone is the absolute bravest thing you can do to heal. Let us just have this one moment, she murmured into the stillness. They sat rooted in the dim light, fingers tangled together, watching the city breathe outside the glass. This was not some magical absolution or a signed treaty of total forgiveness, but it was genuine, and right then, genuine was enough to keep them anchored. 3 long months drifted by, and the impossible happened. She let him lean in. It unfolded effortlessly, like gravity taking control. They were laughing about something their daughter had said. Then the laughter faded. His eyes darkened, fixing on her with that heavy, familiar pull. She leaned into the silence. The kiss was soft and cautious, asking permission with every second. It was entirely stripped of the toxic, burning passion that once consumed their marriage. True peace is always so much quieter than the bitter chaos of our past. That soft brush of lips was brutally grounded in reality. It played out as a silent conversation between two battered souls who had survived absolute devastation, yet decided to stand at the edge again. When Ricardo pulled back, he let his forehead rest heavily against hers. He whispered that he had been starving for that exact moment for 2 brutal years. She felt the undeniable truth in his words. Was this a massive mistake? It felt warmer than she wanted to admit. But she kept that truth locked behind her teeth, refusing to hand him the keys to her heart so easily. He read the room perfectly. Stepping back, he promised to leave before his luck ran dry. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead and faded into the quiet night. Alessia stood alone, fingers tracing her lips, caught between terror and hope. We learn quickly that fear and bravery wear the exact same mask when standing in the dark. The passing months became an exhausting dance of pushing forward and pulling away. They were essentially 2 burn victims, learning how to sit near the open fire again. They stepped out on real dates, feeling the nervous energy of hiring a sitter and dressing up. Across dimly lit tables, they dissected their ruined marriage. They dragged his past toxic behavior into the light, mapping the emotional landmines they used to step on. They fought, of course. Voices were sharply raised, and apologies were forced out the next morning over cold coffee. But the miracle? They never walked away. They showed up for the brutal work that sends most people running. Slowly, a new foundation hardened. It lacked the sweet, naive shine of their youth. This new trust was scarred, heavy, and practically bulletproof. Showing up after a bitter argument is always the true, unglamorous test of any lasting bond. Stick with me, because the real turning point always hides in ordinary moments. It was a random Tuesday. Little Juliana was miles away, spending her first overnight at her grandmother's since the divorce. The silence in the apartment felt heavy. Ricardo came by, and instead of ordering food, they cooked side by side. It was a cautious rhythm they developed during this fragile truce. The kitchen filled with rising steam, the smell of garlic, and the soft laughter of 2 people remembering how to exist together. Later, with wine glasses full, their chatter drifted from daily routines to the buried treasure of their shared past. They carefully uncovered the good memories locked away just to survive the pain. Then the air completely shifted. He looked at her and quietly asked if she remembered their 2nd anniversary. A single honest question has the absolute power to alter the course of your entire life. You and I know that fragile space where an old memory hangs in the air. He brought up their coastal trip to Positano. I remember you getting seasick on that ferry, he teased with a gentle smile. I was not seasick, she shot back. I was just being contemplatively quiet. He laughed, reminding her that she turned a dignified shade of green. She finally cracked up, letting out a real, beautifully unguarded laugh. He watched her with total wonder in his eyes. I had forgotten the sound of your real laugh, he told her softly. The one that proves you finally dropped your guard around me. She stopped instantly, painfully aware of her own raw vulnerability. But instead of running away, she held his gaze and stood her ground. I am scared, she admitted quietly. I really want this to work. The hardest lesson in love is that true bravery is just staying right there when you are absolutely terrified. We are witnessing the anatomy of a shattered foundation. She wanted to believe he had evolved, but admitted that whenever she dared to relax, a trauma response braced for the trap to spring. Ricardo simply nodded, absorbing the reality that her psychological defenses were entirely justified. When she expressed the sheer exhaustion of anticipating his next betrayal, he offered a profound countermeasure. Perhaps they did not need to eradicate the fear instantly. Perhaps that terror could coexist beside the new life they were laying down. He knew he could not erase his underworld history overnight. He could only offer consistency until his peace outshined her panic. A simple truth of life emerges here. Rebuilding trust is never born from a grand cinematic gesture, but from a quiet, unglamorous choice made every single morning. That is an overwhelming burden to carry, she warned him, aware of the toxic pride dictating his world. Yet, the boss did not flinch. He recognized that since he was the architect of their destruction, the agonizing labor of reconstruction fell entirely on his shoulders. She challenged his resolve, questioning what happens when the daily grind of redemption loses its appeal. Looking her dead in the eyes, Ricardo stripped away his ruthless persona. He declared their family was worth the struggle. Searching his hardened face for deceit, she found only raw honesty. He asked her not for blind faith, but just enough belief to try. As she stared at his tattooed hands, a profound realization settled in, a vital lesson for us all. We must learn to accept the permanent marks of the people we finally decide to forgive. She breathed a quiet surrender and leaned in. You and I have likely witnessed countless cinematic embraces, but this was a different psychological release. It lacked the tentative softness of new romance. Instead, an emotional rush unleashing pure hunger. It was the desperate yearning buried beneath years of syndicate warfare and betrayal. His hands gripped her waist, her fingers tangling in his hair as they kissed like two famished souls. Pulling away for oxygen, he pressed his forehead to hers, offering a final exit. He murmured that she only had to say the word, and he would vanish. The plea to stay slipped from her lips before logic intervened. Was she entirely certain? Absolutely not. But life teaches us a simple truth. Perfect certainty is a rare luxury when our guarded hearts are on the line. She understood she might never find total clarity regarding this architect of her past trauma. But here is a simple lesson. You do not need perfect certainty to possess authentic courage. She declared her choice to want him, relegating the underworld drama to the future. Ricardo captured her lips again, acting as an anchor that allowed her to silence her mind. Fast forward to the breaking dawn, she awoke to sunlight flooding the room, his heavy arm draped across her waist. For one fleeting second, the dark history of toxic betrayal and their bitter divorce evaporated. She was simply a woman waking beside the man she loved. When reality crashed back in, she braced for a tsunami of panic. Astonishingly, the anxiety never arrived. Instead, her soul was bathed in an incredible, enduring sense of peace. This newfound peace was fragile, yet rooted in reality. It felt as though an iron door had swung open to a fresh chapter. It was not about erasing their violent history, but initiating a genuine reset. Ricardo mumbled through closed eyes that her thoughts were practically vibrating. She admitted she was processing the shift. When he questioned if it was a positive reflection, she confirmed it was. Opening his eyes in the soft morning light, the ruthless boss appeared entirely stripped of his armor. He wore his damaged heart openly, offering the emotional vulnerability she had craved for years. He quietly asked if she harbored regrets. She playfully suggested he ask again in a few hours. A simple truth of life. An honest, grounded uncertainty is always a stronger foundation than a comfortable, fabricated lie. She whispered into the quiet space that she had no idea what this new dynamic meant. She admitted her confusion about their status, but cemented one fact. Surrendering to him was not a mistake. Kissing her palm, he assured her that her fragile trust was more than enough to build upon. The following months subjected them to a crucible of agonizing tests. Living apart, they meticulously cultivated this connection, gently reintroducing their daughter to a unified family dynamic. They faced the harsh judgment of peers who viewed their reconciliation as pure madness. Ricardo played a strategic long game, moving with deliberate slowness and allowing her to dictate the tempo. Life teaches us a beautiful lesson. The strongest bonds are often forged in quiet privacy, safely insulated from the deafening noise of the outside world. Soon, the rhythm of their intimacy returned, finding them completing each other's thoughts. Her best friend served as the voice of reason, warning that stepping back into this cycle of violence was a blueprint for ruin. Alessia met this concern with unshakable calm. She acknowledged the massive risk, but reframed it as her only shot at the life she desired. The question remained, had the syndicate boss truly evolved? When the second proposal materialized, it stood in poetic contrast to their first engagement. There was no opulent restaurant or ostentatious diamond meant to project his dark power. Instead, it unfolded on a lazy Sunday in her quiet living room, their daughter playing on the rug. It proves a vital life lesson. True love never needs a grand stage or an audience to be profoundly real. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Picture the visual irony unfolding in that room. The formidable Don, a man who dictates the underworld, sits on a suburban floor building wooden towers like an ordinary father. Alessia reads a novel, absorbing the domestic tranquility. Without a hint of dramatic build-up, the boss looks up and drops a monumental question. He asks her to marry him again. This is not a calculated maneuver, but a raw declaration of desire. He argues they fought too relentlessly for this redemption arc to leave it unfinished. It is an unpolished proposal, yet remarkably potent from the exact man who once shattered her reality. A powerful truth for our lives. True redemption is never about finding a way to erase the broken past, but doing the agonizing work to construct a better future. Ricardo wears his dangerous aura like a tailored bulletproof vest, yet he finally allowed her behind that armor. Alessia refuses to grant an effortless victory, demanding he ask properly to force his vulnerability. A genuine smile breaks across his face, not the calculated smirk of a mobster, but the warmth she feared was lost to the cycle of violence. He steps away from their child and drops to one knee. The ruthless syndicate leader is bowing before her. He confesses his unworthiness, explaining he spent 36 grueling months striving to become a man who could honor her. Producing a worn box, he admits to carrying it daily, paralyzed by the fear of rejection. A profound lesson. True love strips away our dangerous ego until we are brave enough to surrender. You and I might naturally expect an ostentatious diamond from a man of his underworld stature. Instead, he opens the box to reveal a simple white gold band. It serves as the psychological antithesis of the heavy rock from their first engagement, perfectly reflecting their newly grounded reality. She accepts, and his physical relief is absolute. Fast forward to the wedding day. They maintain a low profile, gathering only family in a secluded Milanese garden. Their young daughter sprints down the aisle, scattering petals with chaotic joy. Alessia walks toward him in a white dress, not to project naive innocence, but to signify a profound psychological reset. It shows us a beautiful truth. Second chances are never about repeating the broken past. They are about having the courage to write a completely new story. Ricardo stands at the altar, cutting a sharp figure in a dark suit. The Mafia ink climbing his neck flashes a vivid reminder of his ruthless history. Yet, the emotional architecture of the man wearing those tattoos has fundamentally shifted. Stepping to his side, Alessia whispers that he looks terrified. Without hesitation, the powerful boss admits it. He is visibly shaking, haunted by the fear that he might sabotage this miracle, Terrified, this hard-fought redemption arc is an illusion. Locking her gaze onto his, she challenges him to prove its reality. So as they exchange vows devoid of generic platitudes, laying their messy history bare while swearing to break the cycle. A final lesson for the night. The deepest love is found when we stop hiding our scars and finally choose to heal together. You and I have analyzed enough broken promises to recognize when a vow is merely empty air. But observe her standing there. She looks this former terror of the underworld directly in the eyes and offers the ultimate currency, her trust. This is not a cheap surrender. It is a heavy, calculated trust, purchased with undeniable behavioral proof. He answers her challenge with an emotion-choked voice, swearing to wake up every morning and choose to be the man she deserves. When the ceremony is sealed, Ricardo pulls her into an embrace that drowns out their cheering child and the crowd. In that singular second, Alacia experiences an unshakable, profound peace. This is no fairy tale. It is gritty and real. Sometimes you only discover the true strength of a foundation after you watch the house burn down around you. Let us look at this room together. We have seen plenty of cinematic weddings, but this reception is beautiful, unpolished chaos. The floorboards are shaking and the laughter is genuine. Their first wedding was a stiff display of underworld power meant only for the bosses. Tonight they are tearing up the dance floor. Ricardo leans close, asking if she is truly happy. She gives him an ironclad yes, no hesitation. As he pulls back, her eyes find that dark syndicate tattoo on his neck. Once that ink was a bitter joke. Now, looking at a man who burned down his own dark world to save his family, it finally tells the truth. The lesson here is profound but simple. People can absolutely change, but they have to be willing to bleed for that transformation every single day. Notice the exact way he looks at her now. She has clearly become his entire universe. He swears to spend his remaining days earning this second chance, and she gives him a straight answer. If the sky ever falls again, they will carry the weight together. This is no longer the blind denial of their youth. This is gritty, realistic hope. They survived the ugliest betrayal and climbed out of rock bottom with bare hands. 2 years later, their son Marco arrives on a cold November morning. He is screaming, radiating that heavy, stubborn energy he inherited from his father. It is a beautiful thing to witness. The simple truth of life is that real victory is never about having a flawless record. It is about taking your wreckage and building something enduring from the ruins. Picture the most feared man in the underground completely falling apart. Ricardo stands there, cradling his newborn son, and he is openly weeping. The cold boss from the old days would never let a soul see him crack. Meanwhile, their 4-year-old daughter stares at the baby like he dropped from space, complaining about the noise. Alacia laughs gently, reminding the little girl she used to do the exact same thing. The picture is complete. It looks nothing like the hollow fairy tale she once dreamed of. It is scarred, and it is messy. They dragged themselves through fire to reach this moment. But it is deeply real. Life throws its heavy punches, but their foundation holds firm. The truest strength a person can ever show in this life is simply waking up and keeping a quiet promise. Ricardo did not just change his behavior at home. He took a wrecking ball to his empire. The family business is still a titan, but he scrubbed it clean. It is legitimate now. He built something his children will never have to lie about. It took time, but Alacia finally let her heavy armor fall. She will never forget the fire he started in her soul, but the man he became does the work every day. He earned his forgiveness with sweat, not cheap words. Tet Years pass since that second time at the altar. They leave the kids with their grandmother for a night out, driving straight back to the quiet garden where they fought for that second chance. They stand in the exact spot where it all turned around. A meaningful life is simply a long series of hard choices you decide to commit to together. They drift down those familiar stone paths. Then the night air shifts. Ricardo stops, his voice dropping. He asks if she ever regrets letting him back in. Terrified, she still sees the monster who ruined them. Alicia does not lie. She admits that when he comes home late or takes a hushed call, that old panic still grips her chest. The ghost of betrayal never fully leaves. Ricardo looks shattered, begging for forgiveness again, but she gently stops him, telling him not to carry that crushing guilt anymore. Yes, he gave her the scars, but she has made her peace with them. Listen carefully to this point. True healing is never about erasing the ugly marks of your past. It is about learning to live with the heavy echoes and still choosing to love anyway. She asks him the hardest question. In 10 long years, has that fear ever come true? The answer is no, never. She says that single truth alone quiets her darkest anxiety. Stopping in her tracks, she looks straight into his fractured soul and admits she has zero regrets. Not even during those agonizing nights when she felt like a fool for taking him back. She points toward the garden, to the quiet life they pulled out of ruin. This reality is worth bleeding for, she tells him. The once feared boss drops his gaze, whispering that he will never deserve her. Alicia just smiles, pulling him into a slow, anchoring kiss that finally washes his lingering doubt away. It leaves us with a vital truth. Real peace is found when you finally figure out what is actually worth the agonizing pain of rebuilding. He pulls back, resting his forehead against hers, and says he loves her. He makes it clear this is no longer the toxic, jealous obsession from their past. He loves the fierce warrior she became, the woman who survived his worst damage and still found courage to try again. She replies she loves him too, not because he is flawless, but because he wakes up every day and fights his demons to be a better man. Let us unpack this together. Consistent, daily effort will always defeat fake perfection. They stand quietly in the fading light, two flawed souls who shattered each other, only to forge an iron bond. Forget the plastic fairy tales. A genuine love story never ends with a clean fade to black. It just keeps breathing, remaining a beautiful work in progress. His past betrayal brought their world crashing down. Yet it was real love, the grueling kind that demands patience, that glued them back together. They carry deep scars, but they are entirely whole. Their kids will grow up knowing a family can weather the most destructive storms. Their son will learn that being a real man means owning your epic failures and doing the brutal work to fix them. Ricardo, the formerly feared boss, and Alicia, the woman brave enough to walk away, will wake up and choose each other every morning. That brings us to our final truth for the night. Authentic love is never about dodging mistakes or pretending you are flawless. It is about having the ultimate courage to clean up the massive mess you made, and the sheer grace to let someone heal you in return.